I just want to say thanks to the Bernstein guys for asking me to come back again. I enjoyed myself last time. Fun was had by all, especially at the pub afterwards. I hope you've had a good time. We've lost a few people. I feel disappointed now. It's that build-up you gave me.
I always sit at the front so I can't see what's happening.
Okay, that's good. It's like 5 people behind you. So it's like a desert back there. It's fine. I apologize for not having any shoes on. I brought my hiking boots in expecting blizzards today. So just fill me from the waist up. That will be fine. My name's Sam Newman. I work for a company called Thoughtworks. I'm always interested to know who knows about us. So if you put your hands up, okay, so that's more than half. Keep your hands up if you've heard good things about us. It's like 2 people with their hands up. You can't see that on the video. It's actually better than that, but it's good. I'm going to go... Yeah, okay, well, thank you. Everyone knows us as Martin Fowler's company. He does very little work for us, I've got to be honest with you. I am going to go through this presentation. I often do this sort of presentation in about an hour. I've got less time than that today. My Twitter handle is going to be at the bottom. My email is going to be at the end. If you don't get a chance to ask me a question today or in this session, please ping me offline. I'm always happy to have a conversation or an argument about some technology choice I've made. I'm a principal consultant at Thoughtworks. I've been with Thoughtworks for 9 years. I do a lot of things. Thoughtworks doesn't really have much in the way of structure. So it's very hard to explain what it is I do a lot of the time. One of my roles is actually as part of the Technical Advisory Board, the TAB. And we put out a thing called the Technology Radar. We do that twice a year, and that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about today. The edition of the radar we're talking about was one that we put together in India last year in September time. Came out in October. We try and do these 6 monthly. We're a little bit behind on this one. And what we're doing is we're looking at sort of emerging technology trends, techniques, tools from across our organization. Just to give you some context, Martin is but one person of the just over 2,000 people that work at Thoughtworks. We're in 27 different offices around 11 countries. Opened up offices last year in Uganda and in South Africa. So if anybody has an African organization that needs help, maybe some sort of Financial Times organization, give me a call afterwards, that's fine. We also do very, very good software tools to help the Agile developer. Again, if you've got any tools that aren't helpful to you, maybe at the Financial Times, you could give me a call afterwards, that would be great. But we see a lot of things. We go out and we work and we cut code for our clients. That's basically what we do. We're a custom software development company. We go and write code to solve hard problems for people. And along the way, we learn lots of things. We're technologists. And the Technology Radar is our way of distilling that information back and sharing it with all of you. And I'm going to set some ground rules about the tab first. The thing you need to understand about Thoughtworks is if you have 2 thought workers in a room, you already have 3 conflicting opinions. So the tab is 12 people across 2,000. The radar is what the people in the tab think. We argue for about 4 days and it comes out on a piece of paper. We tend to pretty much agree with what's on the radar. You will bump into the odd thought worker that can't understand why I hate Maven so much. I'm not going to talk about that today. Just to understand, it's a bit idiosyncratic. We are unapologetic about that. I think it's okay to have an opinion. We just think our opinions are backed by some fairly well-considered views. We'll see how we go as we get along. You can get the radar online. We've got Kindle versions, iPad versions. It's completely freely available. For some reason, we even localize English spelling between Australia and the UK and America in case it's incomprehensible where Z's are S's. I don't understand that. There are often translations into Portuguese because we've got big offices in Brazil and things, but I don't think I care too much about that. If you can't find it on Google, you probably shouldn't be reading it in the first place. So I'm not going to put a link up about what's in it. I'm going to take you very quickly through the structure. The thing that might be interesting to you is we actually help organizations build technology radars for their own organizations. It's a very interesting way of focusing the mind about what's important. The radar itself only lets you have a certain number of items on it. If we try to distill down all the things thought workers are interested in, we'd have books and books and books. The radar limits us to talking maybe about 100 things, if not less. And we only actually talk in detail probably about 30 or 40 of those. Doing those things with your own organizations can be quite an interesting way of focusing the mind on what's important. So some of this structure I'm going to talk through might be interesting to you. We've split it into sort of 4 things, really. talk about techniques, tools, languages, and platforms. The languages one is very important to us. It tends to be fairly sparsely populated on the radar, but we think from a technologist point of view that the kinds of leap changes and advancement in terms of productivity, happiness for developers, this is a really interesting area, and it's all too often neglected. The fact that Java is still the dominant language all these years after I used the 0.9 beta is quite distressing to me, and we're doing our best to change that. We'll talk about a couple of languages at the end that might be of interest to you. And we try and think about this as a way of sort of distilling this information down as we talk about these 4 quadrants. We also talk about these rings. The outer ring is what we call hold. Some people assume hold means we think technology in this ring is a very, very bad idea. Sometimes we do. But really what we mean is things we put in the hold ring, you should proceed with caution. What this means is this might be a very, very interesting piece of technology, but actually we think it hasn't really been thought through yet, and we think we should leave it alone and let it mature a bit. We put Google Dart in this ring, for example, in the early radar last year. Sometimes we'll also put things here that we just think are bad for the industry. Store procedures, sorry, have been in this ring. I'm unapologetic about that, and we can have a fight about it outside. We can have a fight. That's fine. So we will often put things. We tend to try and be positive. So we tend to try not put too many things here because they're bad. We try and talk about the good thing instead. Last time we put the radar out, we got a lot of flack about Maven being in this ring. This time we've got a lot of flack about having Backbone in this ring. All we can say is it's based on our experience of using these technologies, and across, we've probably got 30 delivery projects going right now. Assess. This is stuff you should be looking at. If you're thinking ahead to where is my next big thing, what's my 2-year strategy, where's the area I need to be thinking at the back of my mind? How is this going to affect me? You know, what should I be considering in the future? We spend a lot of time on this ring. A lot of our technologists love this place, right? This is typically the area where we're not quite ready to bring it to a client, but we're thinking about it in our spare time. This is where a lot of our open source development happens. These are things just on the periphery. Trial. For us to put something in trial means that we are using it on a client project. So these are things where right now you could be adopting these things, they could be improving your own organization's capabilities. So if they're on this ring here, we are actively using it right now on a paying client, just so you understand when you read the radar what that means. And really we say if you're looking at technologies here, you need to understand the risks associated with this, but they could give you some huge benefits. Just understand it. Adopt. You should just use them if the context is right. So one of my colleagues, Mike Mason, he's the head of technology for the Americas. And we have a rule called Mason's Razor. And Mason's Razor is, if you're not using this technology, he will laugh at you down the pub, right? So if the technology passes Mason's Razor, it gets him to adopt. This is really just, it's a no-brainer. If you're doing Ruby web development, for example, you should be looking at Sinatra, and if you're not, it's kind of silly, right? You should be really seriously considering it. It's not saying you should go and pick every single thing and adopt and stick it in your organization. That's clearly not making sense. But this is about a level of maturity. And certainly for some of our more conservative customers, this is where we feel extremely confident in having good conversations about the validity of the technology in this sector. Those of you that may have been reading the radar over time will see technology move in. Sometimes we move things back out as we learn more. We'll talk about some of those technologies and specifically the languages that have made them move into this center ring faster than we actually had previously anticipated. There's also some themes that came out of all the tools and the stuff we talked about. I mean, these meetings we have when we discuss the radar are just a place for us to bring together a whole load of learnings about the organization. And there are sort of 4 key things that we cover in this radar that have been really interesting to us and really interesting to our clients. Mobile is one of them. We're increasingly talking much less about what mobile, we're increasingly talking about trans-device. The idea that there's a desktop world and a mobile world is kind of nonsensical. I can now get a Nexus 3-inch tablet, a Nexus 5-inch tablet, a Nexus 7-inch tablet. I can get my Nexus 10-inch tablet. I've got my iPad, my mini iPad. I've got my laptop. I've got my desktop computer. We're actually thinking less about, do I target this device or that device first, and thinking more about our applications being trans-device. And some of the tools we're going to talk about, specifically Calatrava, can definitely help in this space. Accessible analytics, too long the purview of expensive vendors. Increasingly, tools and stuff coming out of even the operational monitoring space are being used to understand how successful our businesses are, how successful our software is in meeting business objectives. The bar has come down in really understanding what it is our clients want and our clients need. Simple architectures is a key area where increasingly we're seeing the movement away to simpler and simpler and simpler architectures that are being allowed for with good infrastructure. For example, rather than having a giant application that is all things to all men and is therefore very hard to change because if I change it, I break everything else or I stop other things happening, we're increasingly able to think about small microservices that do one thing very, very well. And we can do that because we've got cloud technology and those sorts of things that allow us to spin these things up frequently. And reproducible environments. Before we heard about continuous delivery, a key enabler behind the organizations using continuous delivery and using it well are the ability to provision infrastructure, on a press of a button. And these themes have come out of the last radar, and there are lots of things supporting this. I'm going to really talk about 8 things today because I was there. There was a lot of other talking going on. I liked most of it. I'm going to talk about the things that I care about. So the things on this radar are pretty much what I care about. There's more in the document. I suggest you go read it. Again, ping me online and argue with me. We can start at the beginning. We can start with techniques. The first one I want to talk about is exhaustive browser-based testing. Hold, don't do. So there was a time, I actually remember talking to the guy in charge of testing at Flickr. This was back when Flickr were doing 50 releases per day. He did not believe that it was possible to test a web application via a browser. This is despite the fact that at this point Selenium, which we created at Thoughtworks to test our time and expenses application for some reason, was over a year old. If you think about where that conversation was those 6 or 7 years ago to where it is now, the idea that we can test our applications, our browser-based applications, using things like WebDriver, using Wattier, using whatever other technology, and do so in a way that's fairly easy for developers to have access to, everyone just assumes you can do that now. The issue is the pendulum is starting to swing a little bit too far. And what we're seeing is somebody asked a very quick question at the end of the last session about testing. Some people, when they write tests, they write too many tests. There's a lack of critical thought about what makes a good test, about why we're doing it. And especially around browser-based testing, this can be killer for productivity. It's not just the time taken to write something, it's the time taken to run it. The number of organizations we're now seeing where their test suites take hours to run, which means the developer gets feedback way too late about how good their check-in is, kills productivity. We instead like to think about why you're writing the test and what you need to do. The tools are there and they're great, and we can spin up environments like never before, but that's no excuse for not applying a little bit of critical thought. And as the comment I was actually, we're talking about the FT, thinking about the risk of a change, and these things should be applied when working out what it is you want to test. A different type of testing, which is straight into adopt for us. One of the changes that's happened over the last few years with us is that we've brought a lot more experience design in-house because we understand the importance of using different techniques to understand what the people really, really want. We're using guerrilla testing a lot. Did a project recently to allow people to book hotels on their phone. Very, very early days. And we're looking at the back-end integration challenges that they had within their organization. Our UX person knocked up some few static HTML pages. It took him an afternoon. He went down to the local coffee shops. He got a very simple £2 USB camera. He taped it onto the back of an iPhone, ran a cable into his laptop, and basically gave a tenner to anyone that would try it out. And we videoed it. The feedback we got in a few afternoons was invaluable. Really interesting feedback you wouldn't even think about. Like somebody going through and clicking through to a hotel and saying, oh, it's automatically assumed as 2 people are staying. If I'm single, I'm going to be really offended about this. You know, those sorts of bits of feedback you wouldn't even think to get. Total time invested in getting the mock-ups Going out to that coffee shop and doing that mock-up and doing that test, really minimal stuff. There's a lot of really good, cheap tooling around there to help you to record people's reactions as they use a laptop, to capture things happening on mobile devices. This stuff is dirt cheap. There's no reason you shouldn't be considering it, especially for mobile, but not just. There's great tools like Silverback that allow you to record from the iSight camera, watch what's happening on the screen when looking at a website. There's tools out there that allow you to put out screenshots, send them out to the wide world and get feedback on them, send clients to, send just people out in the unwashed masses to your beta version of your site, record them clicking around and an audio track of them talking about their feeling while they're doing it. This stuff doesn't cost you tens of thousands. It doesn't require external agencies who specialize in IMAP tracking. This stuff is much cheaper than ever before, and you really should be taking a look at it. Tools. Typically the area that's oversubscribed for us, because although we like to say it's always a people problem, we kind of always hope it's a coding tool problem. So we end up with lots of things here. Straight in with Adopt, very easy one for us is Graphite. Monitoring and tool monitoring in the operations space has often been dominated with tools that aren't terribly good. The commercial tools are almost universally appalling when it comes to being something that's accessible to a developer. They don't tend to give you many different options about how you configure it. They tend to be only understood by the operations guy sitting in his dark cave. Graphite is an awesome tool that allows you to even gauge in near real time what's happening in your systems. Incredibly easy to integrate. You've got plugins for all sorts of systems that can just throw out information out to these Graphite nodes. Under the hood, it's a round-robin database. What that basically is doing what it means is it can store data for years. But what it does is, say, for a year ago, it only maybe stores a sample every minute or every 10 minutes. So you get general trend information. But for right now, you get highly detailed information. You get a dashboard that allows you to configure what graphs you want to see. That generates a URL that you can paste into all your systems all over the place. We're using this for operations tracking. We're using this for business metrics tracking. The total time to get set up and running with Graphite is, honestly, you install Collect-D, you install Graphite, the whole thing on a Linux box can take you less than an hour. And you've got a very good bulletproof, production-ready monitoring system. It's an excellent tool, and I thoroughly recommend it. Sort of another tool that I found at the beginning of last year is a tool called Locust. Hopefully some of you are doing performance testing, automated performance testing, to understand, does my application handle the load I want it to handle? You know, am I going to handle the 200,000 people that I expect are going to come to the website about my shed? You know, my shed's got a big following on Twitter. I'm expecting this huge influx. I hear the shed market in China. It's a really big thing. I've got a nice gazebo out front, you know. But can I handle the load? And again, we've seen the commercial tools in the performance testing space. How many of you have ever had to deal with some of the HP suite of performance testing tools like LoadRunner and things like that? There's groans. There's some people too ashamed to put their hands up. It's understandable. And often we look to the open source world to provide more productive alternatives to these vendor-driven heavy tools. And actually, we've been very poorly served. You've got JMeter, you've got Grinder, which, when you get down to it, are really painful, actually. They don't make it easy for you to define scenarios in terms of the programming language. They don't always make it easy for you to spin up and generate a load on multiple machines or gather basic data or whatever else. There's some guys in Sweden who worked on the, they did the chat system for Battlefield 3. And they were an excellent company to DICE. They're working sort of for DICE. And obviously, Battlefield 3 is a big product. They have a lot of volume. They needed to test the volume. They wrote this Python-based tool called Locust. Very, very easy to write scenarios in Python, spin up multiple nodes, hit the load against your server, you get real-time data coming back, it does basic stats analysis for you, all out of the box. Compared to Grinder or JMeter, incredibly easy to use, very well worth looking at. The nice thing, though, is they also stopped thinking about just requests per second, as though that's the important thing. They thought, well, no, we need to simulate a person using a website. Weirdly, human beings don't click to a page and immediately click another link, and then immediately click another link, and then immediately click another link. That's not what they do. They click, they look, they think, they consider, they click again. So their API actually has constructs for doing things like thinking about the user wait time. So you can construct these scenarios that are realistic scenarios, but run them at load. Great tool. We really like it. I don't think it's perfect, but it's significantly better than the other tools out there. You might be getting a theme that many of the tools we recommend are free and open source, just because we tend to like those tools. There are commercial tools that do come up on the radar. We've had things like Splunk on there. Excellent tool, excellent product. We've had Amazon, we've had Heroku, people that provide really good quality services. So I don't want you to think I'm just on an open source bandwagon, but the guys behind Locus are lovely guys. It's a great tool, and I recommend you take a look. On to platforms. Calatrava is very, very interesting. We would now move this into trial if we were doing the radar today. One of the challenges you may be facing in your own organizations is my CMO has come to me and told me we need a mobile application. He says it needs to be mobile. What does that mean? Am I targeting BlackBerry? Probably not, right? Because, you know, it's 2013, not 2005. Am I targeting iOS as my first device? Am I targeting Android? What about mobile web? We do a lot of work with our clients talking about mobile strategy. In general, for a mass market approach, we tend to veer towards mobile web first and then moving into iOS and Android. There are lots of problems around Android fragmentation that puts people off those platforms. And then you start getting concerns about re-implementing a native client for all of these different platforms. What that's led to is this idea of the hybrid mobile application, where what I'm going to do is sort of have a very, very thin wrapper and put all, but actually serve up the UI and everything else from a HTML5 application. What that leads to is me starting up a native application on my device and having an application that looks like a native application but doesn't behave like a native application because the responsiveness is ever so just off. It's not quite right. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel as fast as it could be. And that leads to less than stellar, feelings from the user. The idea is kind of sound. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got for every platform, you're going to build a native application. But then you're reproducing an awful lot of functionality on every client. How I talk to my server at the back end, how I get data, the logic that's involved. Where really the only stuff that actually needs to change is the UI that's specific to that device, the pixel dimensions, the controls I need to work with. What Calatrava tries to do is it says, well, what we're going to do is we're going to encapsulate the business logic, the stuff that really is reusable between platforms. And rather than systems that try and generate you a UI from some spec and ends up being lowest common denominator, it says, no, actually, you should probably create the very, very thin veneer that's the UI. But all the logic associated with your application, you're going to write as JavaScript. And Calatrava provides you hooks that then have got implementations in Android and iOS and for the web. So you can write the core business logic, the behavior of how you talk to the server, the behavior in the client, and Calatrava provides those little hooks, and then you just put a veneer on top. And that allows you to create applications with the sort of finesse of the local native client, but still we're reusing a large amount of logic between those devices. We actually built this for a US airline that just released a new iPad app and booking applications. They've gone down quite well. I can't mention the names though. We're using this in multiple clients. It's written by a colleague of mine, Giles Alexander. If you're interested in Calatrava, give it a go. We're running hack nights actually monthly in the London office to help improve the tool. Looking at actively adding support for other mobile platforms, things like Windows Phone and those sorts of things. And we feel this is a really good way of handling multiple devices without having to go to sort of lowest common denominator, UI builder type systems. Another platform that's very interesting for extremely different reasons is a platform called Datomic. Datomic's actually come from the people behind Clojure. They have some very specific ideas about how the world should work, and they put a lot of them into this new database. Datomic is trying to handle the problem of how can I have very expressive, rich queries and at the same time store large volumes of data. and scale my number of clients. I use some incredibly interesting ideas around how you scale it. So for example, on a traditional database, if I run a query, my query goes to the server where the data is located, and that computation is done at that server. That means if I send a very bad query, I impact the performance for all other users of that database. I accidentally send a Cartesian product type SQL query, and I'm excellent at doing that without realizing it. I can hose that system for everybody else. Datomic actually says, well, no, our data store is just a giant scalable data store. They actually build this on top of DynamoDB, but it could work on top of React as well. Clients then pull back the information they need and run those queries on the client side. But it embodies concepts of immutability of data. You actually look at the database at a given point of time. Data never goes away. I can look at it right now and pay the performance hit of doing so and running my queries against the most up-to-date version of that data. Or I can say, I can just look at the last version of the data I had, and the queries doesn't make any difference. It's an incredibly interesting model. It's the first fundamental shift we've had in database technologies in quite a while. When you get down to it, graph databases are just graph structures. The column-oriented data stores are not that new and have been around for decades. The relational stores, they're just different flavors on the theme. Datomic's actually doing something fundamentally different. Whether or not it ever gets further in, I don't know. But it's a very interesting model. There's some great videos online that take you through the design thought processes behind it. It's an incredibly interesting thing to look at and understand how it works. So whether or not it's going to be ready for your next hot application, I don't know. But as a technologist, it's something that we're really interested in. So take a look. On to my favorite topic, languages. I'm a bit of a language Nazi. We'll keep it simple, and we've got 2 languages in Adopt. Scala. Any Scala fans in the house? Oh, come on. There's more than 2 of you in the house, you know. Scala. Actually, I'm going to put both of them up. Of course, my favorite, Clojure. I left my fixed-wheel bike and my hipster trousers outside. Both languages that over the last sort of 2 radars have been moving from assess to trial into adopt. We're using these in production at many clients. We're using Scala, I think it's fair to say, at many more places than we are using Clojure at the moment. But most recently, we've been using Clojure on a genomics project looking at cancer cures in the West Coast, where the inherent capabilities of the language are enabling us to work with terabytes worth of data. These are both languages based on the JVM, which is probably the single most viable platform out there at the moment in terms of a language platform. Java, the language, is pretty much dead. The pace of adoption, it's not that contentious, you know. If you look in the average enterprise, the pace of adoption of new versions of Java, the language, is incredibly slow. And the pace at which they can incorporate language features that have been around for 20 or 30 years is very, very slow. The same things that supported the growth of Java into the enterprise, which is the community process, the JSR process, that brought lots of people together to get behind a goal and drive it forward, create an ecosystem of tools. These are the same things that made it successful, are also the same things that have slowed the pace of innovation to a halt. I'm not a big fan of the Microsoft ecosystem in general. C# is an awesome language. A language unshackled by committees and processes and shared interests and everything else, just cool language features in a very cool language. The rest of the platform could do with some work. The language is excellent, it's first rate. Java, the language, is fairly uninteresting. I can't imagine when it will be likely that we'll be seeing Java 7 and Java 8 at the majority of the clients that we work at. These languages are moving much faster, and they sit on top of the same platforms. They can call all of the code that you've already written in Java. They can run inside the same application containers. You can use the same monitoring tools. There's good IDE support for them. So if you're already a Java shop and you're bored with Java and you're looking with something that might provide you a productivity benefit, these are 2 to look at. But they're very, very different. They're starkly different in terms of their mindset, in terms of the capabilities. Scala, is basically came out of a research project that Martin Adetsky did. He, of generics fame, if you really like the generic system in Java, you'll probably like Scala. I don't know how many generics fans we've got in the house. It's not that kind of house, I think. But anyway, there's a lot of very interesting language features in Scala. It has more advanced object-oriented features. It has some functional programming concepts. It allows you to program Java in a bit more of a flexible way. Many people move to Scala because they can take how they use Java programs, go to Scala quite quickly. You can code Scala just like it's Java. Graham Tackley at The Guardian talks about this as Scala is like Java without the semicolons. And that's fine, and what you can do is you can slowly ease into the other language features it offers. However, I think it does have a very, very large amount of language features, a vast array of language features, significantly more than any other language. It's probably similar to where C++ got to, where you had C++ with a large number of features added on. You had object-oriented programming, you had procedural programming, you had sort of template-based programming, and you've often got a mix and match within that code base. That is something that can sometimes cause challenges within Scala. We find it a more productive language than Java. There are still challenges around things like compile time and tool support, IDE support, but we've built production software with it. Developers are happy, they're more productive. We find working with clients, moving them from Java to Scala, they are more productive in a small amount of time. We're very measured about how we do it. We introduce new language features piece by piece, and you just need to pick the idiomatic style that's going to work from you. Do I want functional programming styles here? Do I want an object-oriented style of programming here? I'm also unconvinced about the merits of its typing system, the static typing system. That's a computer science conversation that I really don't want to have today. But anyway, I'm not going to have arguments about it. It just seems evil and wrong. But anyway, that's good. That's very interesting. They're adding new language features all the time, and it's not quite clear to me that there's always a very clear, coherent view about that. But there's some very interesting stuff happening there. So definitely give it a look. Clojure is sort of a completely different thing entirely. Weirdly, it's actually got a better story about interoperability with Java, and yet it's not an object-oriented, well, it's not the object-oriented language you're used to. Clojure is a Lisp. Now, Lisps have this weird characteristic that they've been around since 1953. They have far fewer language features than Scala, far fewer language features than Java, but are actually significantly more powerful. It used to be the case that everybody, if they went to did a computer science course, would learn about Lisp. Now everyone learns about Java. And so what happens is people are very used to what Java looks like. We often call this the OCaml style of languages, languages that follow a lot of the behaviors of those sorts of languages. And they look at Clojure and think, that's too complicated. The reality is, Java's actually got a lot of hidden things that you just get used to over time. Clojure is a very, very simple, straightforward language. It's quicker to train. If someone knows no programming, I'll be able to explain to them how to use all aspects of Clojure in about a fifth of the time of doing it with Scala. But it's quite alien looking. It's an inherently functional language. It embraces the concept of pure immutability. Rich Hickey, who's the guiding force behind Clojure, believes that many of the challenges we face in our industry and that we see time and time again are around things like how do you handle multiple cores, are caused by the fact that we insist on one thread sticking a bit of memory here and then letting anybody else have a free-for-all, changing it however they want. So it's very core ideas within the language. Everything within Clojure is immutable unless you explicitly say otherwise, and then it uses a concept called software transactional memory. He has incredibly efficient, persistent data structures. If I take a collection and I add an item to it, the collection I get back, is actually a different one. It's persistent. The old one's still there, the new one's still there. It seems quite inefficient, it seems quite slow. Actually, they're so fast that the Scala guys were looking at using the Clojure collections under the hood because they were faster than their own implementations. Scala's mindset is kind of saying that the future is going to be like Java, but with a few more bells and whistles. The Clojure mindset is saying that what we're doing about how we write our systems is fundamentally wrong, and that we need to think a different way of doing it. It's not the fact that it's Lisp that is important. It's the ideas that it embodies. If you're interested in this, I really recommend looking at some videos from Rich Hickey talking about the concepts of identity and state and how important that is, and just give it a play. It will seem alien to you. I had to come back to Clojure about 3 times until it finally stuck. And now what I find is when I go back to working in Java with clients or even Scala or other languages, I'm taking the mindset of Clojure back with me. I'm taking those ideas, that sort of real fundamental shift into a functional, immutable style of programming. One thing to consider, Alan Kay, who's the father of object-oriented programming, believes that there's basically only 2 languages where you can actually do proper object-oriented programming, one of which is Smalltalk and the other of which is Lisp. He didn't consider C++ an object-oriented language and doesn't to this day, as far as I'm aware, consider Java an object-oriented language. So there's some interesting conversations. This stuff will just be like, oh, that's interesting, that's a nice feature, and you'll find a few rough edges. This stuff will blow your mind. But I think as technologists, we sort of owe it to ourselves in the industry to keep pushing ourselves forward and trying new things. This is going to be a nice productivity improvement to you. It will be gentle. If you're a little bit risk adverse and you try something gentle, definitely take a look. Much more fun than Java. If you really want to look at big shifts in your productivity and the way you approach problems, this is the guy to go for. That's time. I don't know if I'm over or under. I'm probably over. But I'm about perfect. Wow, look at that. Was that about the time or just in general? Okay, it's fine. Thanks for your time and your attention. I focused on like 8 points of about 100 blips on the radar. There's other detail there. Please take a look. We've got some time for questions. Otherwise, you can ping me offline. Thoughtworks, we're hiring. We're nearly always hiring. If you're interested, come speak to me. And we do some awesome tools, by the way. FT guys, hi. But thanks for your time.
Has anyone got any questions for Sam?
Okay,
there you go.
A question there.
Just quickly.
So, very interested that you're talking about JVM languages. So you mentioned Scala and Clojure.
Yep.
Where would you put Groovy on the map there?
So the question was, interested in JVM languages. We've got Java, we've got Scala and Clojure. Where would we put Groovy? We've used Groovy in places. I think in general, I think initially it sort of gave us sort of Ruby-like, semantics on the JVM platform. We've actually put a lot of work into JRuby as well. Our Mingle tool was, we shipped the first Ruby on Rails product that you could commercially download. The only way you could make that work was via JRuby. In general, if you're looking for a language like that, I'd take a look at JRuby first because there's a wider community around Ruby the language. I would say if we're using Groovy, most of the places we're using it in are actually as part of Gradle, as a build system.
That's why I asked, actually.
Yeah, we use Gradle and we like Gradle.
I hate maintenance, so.
Everyone does. So we do use Gradle, we like Gradle, it's a nice tool. Groovy we've had ups and downs with, kind of like, we tend to be looking for a more powerful language on the JVM. Scala, Clojure, JRuby are in the mix, probably before Groovy is. Any other questions? There's a question at the back there.
Jace, if you're going to ask a question, it's going to have to be a really short question.
Okay, go on. Do you want to,
Three words: Graphite, Locust, and Datomic. .NET. Or .NET's not really a word.
So what do you mean by that?
Can you integrate them with .NET, would you say? Because I'm very interested in those 3 tools that you mentioned, but I'm a .NET developer and I'm wondering, could they be used in the .NET world?
So Graphite is just a server. So you can throw data to it incredibly easily. There are lots of client libraries out there. That's not going to be an issue. You don't when you customize Graphite, you don't need to write any code to do so. So from your point of view, Graphite is no different to MySQL or anything else. Datomic, I got to be honest with you, I don't know is the answer. You can spin up Datomic instances on AWS very easily and find out. I couldn't honestly tell you. Locust, the issue is that you have to write your, you basically have to define your test scenarios in Python. Now, I happen to know that Iron Python is pretty good. I've got no idea if anyone's actually got that working, unfortunately, in a .NET environment. But you can satisfy yourself by having a really awesome language in C#. Right, so you can laugh at all the Java weenies with the fact they're still waiting for closures. Right. Okay. And the question there?
By endorsing the veneer, the thin veneer approach, are you essentially saying that HTML5 is not ready? I mean, you've got people out there like Accenture with their Fastbook who are definitively saying that HTML5 is ready, and you've got Facebook who publicly, very famously said HTML5 is not ready. Where do you fall on that spectrum, and how's that time with the tool that you've produced?
What Facebook said was we wanted to reach a mass market, and then we wanted to specialize when we understood what we're doing and offer a more responsive solution. Our general strategy is typically that one. For many of our clients, they're often enterprise organizations, they're trying to reach as many people as possible. For them, what we would often start with as a normal good starting point is to talk about a HTML5 trans-device web application using responsive design as a way of getting yourself out quickly. If you've got an existing website, let's repurpose it, let's get it out there, see what happens. The key thing, though, is don't try and pretend you're something you're not. Don't try and pretend that that control looks like a native control. Because if you click on it and it behaves 0.1 of a second slower than a normal native control, it feels wrong. So HTML5 is ready, but there are some types of interaction types that they might not work for. And I think once you understand your market, then go deep. Go broad, then go deep. For some clients, they understand their users so well, we know we need to go iOS first because they've already got some offering out there. That's where their target base is. HTML5 is kind of ready for some interactions and for some browser devices. Can you do all the things you can do in native across all devices happily? Absolutely not. Aside from the Android fragmentation issue, which is significantly worse in my opinion than browser support ever was, it's just that the speed and the behavior of the browsers you're going to meet in the real world just aren't quite there all the time. And this even happens for desktop applications. So I think the key thing is understand your users, understand the kinds of interactions that are going to speak to those users, and then pick the right tool for the job. So, long way of saying it depends, I'm afraid. I think the key thing with Calatrava is it allows us to start the journey on mobile web or trans-device web, with responsive design, have that core of logic about the interactions, the behaviors in that JavaScript, and then if we want to go iOS or Android, we can bind into it. And that's something we're doing more with our clients. Even if they only want mobile web, we're looking to use Calatrava first to give them the option to move afterwards. Question?
What are your thoughts on phone gap then, in that context?
Our thoughts on phone gap, well, the issue with phone gap has been that it's always going to be lowest common denominator. You end up with an experience that might be better than a HTML5 experience, hopefully will be, won't be as good as a native experience, and it can often come across as feeling a little bit dishonest. I've yet to see, to be honest with you, what is in effect a code generation system type thing like that ever really work. I think you end up getting the worst of all worlds rather than the best of all worlds. It's not something we've recommended to any client I can think of in the last 2 years. I mean, I don't want to denigrate other people's efforts. I know there's lots of work behind it. We just think that the Calatrava approach really embraces the value of a really rich, responsive, interactive experience. It feels to me that phone gap is almost sort of putting the developer first in a way. I don't know, it doesn't feel right. And the results are not anywhere near as good as actually spending a little bit more time. I think it's kind of interesting especially with devices that's run on our phone. It's not about often the features those applications have that's important. It's not the number of features that makes the application successful. It's the execution. An application with a very small number of features that's executed extremely well will often sell more, make more money, be more successful for that organization than a similar application with a long shopping list of features where the execution is just ever so slightly off. And with a sort of a phone gap type approach, it sort of promotes a little bit more, let's get the features out quickly, rather than let's get one feature out, Let's understand how it works. Let's execute it really well. Let's move on to the next idea. So that's my thoughts on PhoneGap.
I think you're spot on this business of even if it's ever so slightly off, it just fails because it creates a cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Suddenly you've paid 500 quid or whatever for this wonderful piece of hardware, and it's a beautiful experience, and suddenly you've got something that just isn't quite there, and forget it.
Yeah.
Everything else is just not worth it.
Well, I think you guys can have a conversation with the FT offline. Conversation, we've got question is Stripey top in the front, and then we'll do.
Can we make just this last one because we're.
Okay. You come. The other one comes from me afterwards.
What are your thoughts about jQuery Mobile for a branded website and very popular, kind of lots of users?
So jQuery Mobile, again, I've seen people using jQuery Mobile to pretend a control is a native control. It won't behave like a native control reliably, so don't try. So it's a website, then don't pretend it's native. I think the problem is, so we were on a client and they wanted a very, very fancy combo box to the extent that we had to code it from scratch in JavaScript. We spent weeks getting the performance as fast as we could possibly make it. It was fractionally slower than normal combo box experience that you would expect in a browser. A page transition going from one page to another page, the second page taking a second longer than the other page, people don't really notice. That combo box being ever so slightly off hit the sort of user satisfaction on that page huge. So don't pretend. Own up. Make it look like a website. Don't try and be something you're not. And that's my concern about that stuff, is that every now and then it will behave exactly the same. The performance semantics, the JavaScript execution engine on that particular mobile device may be good enough to offer you that. But you're attracting a broad market, and that's my concern. It's the same sort of concerns around PhoneGap. Don't try. Be honest, own up, say it's a mobile website, make it look like a mobile website. Even if you decide to put a mobile website inside a very thin application, make the controls look non-native, and just own up to the fact. And then, look to go native where you need to. We want those richer interactions. And that's just what we've felt from seeing from talking to customers and clients and things like that. I hope it wasn't too harsh. I hope people out there are using loads of PhoneGap and jQuery Mobile now. I feel bad. Sorry. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and you can spam me here.
Sounds brilliant. Right, just that's for me to sort of sum it up really. To Jagdeep, to Chris, to Sam, thanks very much for all that effort you put in. Great presentations. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks ever so much for coming, and hope to see you again next time, and the bar's still open. Thanks very much.